Hello, let's solve another Leetcode problem. Given an array, rotate the array by k steps where k is non-negative, meaning we need to shift all the elements to the right and the overflowing elements would come to the start of the list. The problem seems quite straightforward and there are a number of ways to solve this. The first thing I can think of is to rotate the array by one place at a time so that we loop through the entire array. And this needs to be repeated k times. It does work, but the time complexity would be big O of n times k because we're doing the shift and repeating that step k times. This can be optimized or sped up a little. For example, if n, which is the length, was equal to 7 and k was equal to 14, and if we rotated this list 14 times, we would arrive at the original list itself. So rotations can be computed as k mod n. This does speed it up a bit, but even then the time complexity remains the same. A better approach would be to find the new position for each element and then place them in that position. But since we need to keep track of the element which was earlier there in that position itself, we need to put these in the new list, which means we're using additional space. So let's try to come up with a better approach to solve this. If we observe the input list and how the rotated list looks, the first element is always moved by k indices, and the displaced elements come to the start of the list. Let's look at this example where we have the numbers 1 through 7, the length of the list n being 7, and k equal to 3. Let's say we reverse the entire list first, then we would arrive at this. Now, when k is equal to 3, let's say we reversed the first few elements till k, and we reversed the elements after that from k to n. So in this case, if we did that, we would get 5, 6, 7, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, which is our result. This seems like a hacky way to do it, but it works because when we rotate by k, we're basically moving the starting numbers by k elements and getting the last numbers to the start of the list. This makes the problem quite simple to solve. Let's write some pseudo code to see how this can be implemented. If we had an input list nums and k, which is the value to be rotated by, and let's say n is the length of our input list. We first optimize or compute k as k mod n to minimize the number of rotations or shifts. We can use a helper function called reverse, which reverses the elements based on a start and end index. So the reverse function can take nums, start, end as the inputs, and it can swap elements from start to end. Then we can use this helper function by first reversing the entire list, so which would be reverse of nums 0, n minus 1. Then we can reverse the first k elements, which would be reverse and then reversing the other part of the list, which are the numbers after k. And then we can just return the result nums, which would be the rotated list. In this code, you observe that we're not returning anything from reverse because when we pass a list, it's passed by reference, and whatever modifications or additions are made to the list are done in place, and the nums array has that. If you look at this code, we're just doing multiple reverses which all have a time complexity of big O of n. So even if you added all of those, the time complexity would be big O of n. We're not using any additional space. The space complexity would be big O of 1 or constant space. This looks like a good solution to this problem. Let's go ahead and code the solution on Leetcode. As a first step, we can check if nums is empty or none and then just return. We then compute n, which is equal to the length of the input nums. We can optimize k by doing k is equal to k mod n. As discussed, if the number of times you wish to rotate is larger than the length of nums itself, then we can optimize k by just doing k mod n. So for this example that we see here, k is equal to 3 and length is 7, so that's fine. But if for the same example k was 10, then we could do k is equal to 10 mod 7, which will be equal to 3. We then need a reverse function which can be used to reverse certain elements of the list with a start and end index. Let's code that helper function. We can call it reverse. It accepts nums, start, and end as the arguments. We want to loop as long as start is less than end. We perform the swap by doing nums of start, comma nums of end is equal to the element at the start index and the element at the end index and the element at the start index. This works in Python. If you're using a different language, you might have to use a temporary variable to perform the swap. We then increment start by 1 and decrement end by 1. This helper function should reverse the list from that start to end index. We then call this function with nums 0, n minus 1 since we want to reverse the entire list. We then reverse the elements from 0 to k or 0 to k minus 1. And then we reverse the numbers from k to n, which would be nums, k, n minus 1. After we perform these three reversals, we've arrived at the result, which is the input list rotated 3 times so that the first index is rotated by k now. Let's go ahead and run this code to see if it works for this example. Yes, it does. Let's go ahead and submit the solution to see if it works for all possible inputs. We can see that it works. So in this particular problem, which was to rotate the array by k, there are a lot of ways to solve this and approach this. And the reversal step that we did might seem a bit tricky or hacky, but if you understand how it works, it seems quite simple and good to implement. And this has a space complexity of big O of 1 because we didn't use any additional space, and a time complexity of big O of n. I hope this helped. If you have any questions or doubts, please comment below and I'll try responding to them. Thank you.